You're about to discover how you can get cheaper cruise fares based on your job or the industry you work in. I'm Gary Bembridge. This is another of my cruise tips for travelers. There are a whole bunch of jobs or industries where by simply doing a few things or asking, you can actually get cheaper cruise fares. This is not something that I'd really realized until quite recently. So I'm going to take you through 8 jobs and industries, and hopefully you are in one of those and you can get a discount. So let's start, first of all, with this one. If you're in the military, there is a lot of options in terms of getting discounted cruise fares. So if you're in the military or you're a veteran, you will find there are loads of opportunities. The 3 biggest cruise lines, Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian Cruise Line, all offer discounts for military or retired military pretty much all year round. The way you actually access these varies. So some of them you can either call the cruise line up and ask them, or some of them actually when you go through the booking process, you'll find at some point, for example in Royal Caribbean, as you go through the booking process, you then just simply tick a box if you are military. But you'll find many of the other cruise lines on an ongoing basis will offer deals. So Celebrity, Disney, MSC, they all offer deals. In fact, some of the best that I looked at in terms of deals, I think are Royal Caribbean and MSC Cruises. They have lots and lots of opportunities for military people to get discounted fares. So if you have been in the military or currently in the military, you can definitely get lower cruise fares and often extra onboard credit. The second area where you can get great cruise discounts is if you are what I guess in the US are called first responders. So particularly the police and firemen. And there are lots and lots of opportunities here for discounts. They are a little bit more difficult to find sometimes than in the military, but you'll find lots and lots of opportunities. So you'll find, for example, that Royal Caribbean, Celebrity, MSC Cruises, certainly at the time that I was recording this, they were all offering very specific first responder discounts on various selected cruises. So it tends to be selected cruises at certain times. I also found if you use some of the cruise aggregators, so for example, Vacations to Go, they have a very specific section which is just for first responders and police, and they will tell you what deals are going at that particular time. The way you access those are at the time of booking, you have to provide either a copy of your ID or some kind of proof that you are a first responder. But you can be, for example, in the US, if you are a federal, state, or even a local police officer, you can get access to those. If you're a fireman, you can be even a volunteer fireman to access those. So there are lots of opportunities. So if you are a policeman or a fireman, then definitely you have an opportunity to get lower cruise fares. They tend to be more selected sailings. The third area is if you're a healthcare professional, so you're a doctor, nurse, or you work in the healthcare industry. Now, these are much more difficult to get than the previous 2 categories. And in fact, it's even easier to get if you actually work in the UK. So what I found in the UK, if you work for the National Health Service, no matter what role you have, you can access lots of discounts. Now, the discounts tend to be more in the form of extra onboard credit, but you will also find you can get discounts of set amounts on different cruises. And there is a very specific site that will help you do that. So for example, the site in the UK is called healthservicediscounts.com. And they offer everything from Princess, Celebrity, Royal Caribbean, Holland America, Norwegian Cruise Line, Costa, MSC, P&O Cruises, Cunard, Carnival, River Cruises. So again, lots of opportunities. You're not necessarily going to get big discounts in fares always, but you will get extra onboard credit, which of course helps enormously. The fourth type of profession is if you're a teacher or you actually work in universities, you can also get various discounts and extra onboard credit. Again, a bit like with the healthcare service, you tend to have to access those via different organizations rather than with the cruise lines direct. So you're normally booking through being a member of some kind of site or organization. But definitely there are opportunities to get discounts and deals. So for example, I've found there's a couple of partnerships where you can get discounts on lines including Royal Caribbean, MSC Cruises, Disney, Princess, Holland America, Norwegian. The sites that you get those through are sites like teacherstravelsdiscounts.com, myeducationdiscount.com, and again also on aggregator sites like Vacations to Go. They do have a specific section to help teachers and academics get discounts on cruises. The next area is if you're a government employee, particularly a government employee in the United States, there is a way of also getting discounts. There's a website which you can join if you can prove that you're a government employee, and that site is called GovX. Through that site, in addition to getting discounts on all sorts of things, they do have a very specific travel section, and again for cruises where you can get discounted cruises or extra onboard credit. So if you work in any sort of government organization, then you can probably get a discount or some benefits on a cruise. The next area is one of the most established for getting travel discounts, and that's airline employees. There's a thing called interline rates, and this was set up to help airline employees travel on different airlines. They used to be for fares which were pretty close to flying, or they were standby fares. This is now expanded into cruise lines. So if you work in the airline industry, you can probably access an interline fare for cruises. They tend to be at more shorter notice, so they'll tend to be in the sort of 90 to 60 days before a cruise, after people have paid their final balance. When cruise lines then have capacity they're then trying to sell. The advantage of the interline rates is they don't want to make this very public, so they have very specific agencies. So you'll find, and you'll know this if you're an airline employee, that you work through interline agencies which have these rates, and you have to prove that you're an airline employee, but you can get some great discounted rates on cruises. And it will vary. Most cruise lines do get involved in interline rates to help clear inventory. So it's definitely something to do. So you need to go through one of the agencies that are interline and offer interline fares both for hotels, flights, and now for cruises. Also with airline employees, you'll find that depending on the site, you'll sometimes find affiliated, like air traffic controllers may be able to get access to it, or people who just work in airports. And the rules do differ slightly. But if you work anything to do in the airline industry, you're probably going to be able to get a discount. There are some specialist sites like airlinecrewdiscount.net, and again, Vacations to Go have an interline search opportunity, and another site called abc.com. What if you don't work in the airline industry? Well, don't despair, because if you do anything related to travel, you're probably also going to be able to get a discount. So you could work for the railways, you could work in air traffic control, you could work in a hotel, you could work in a tour industry, a tourism board, anything that promotes and sells travel, you're probably going to be able to get a discount on a cruise. Now, one of the examples I'd like to give is a company that I know relatively well in the UK, which is called Touchdown. So Touchdown will sell, again, to anyone in the travel industry who can prove they're in the travel industry. They will sell cruises which are at great prices. And again, it tends to be in that period after 90 to 60 days when the cruise lines are looking to clear cabins they haven't sold. So again, if you do anything related to the travel industry, take a look at sites like Touchdown to see if you can qualify. In fact, even travel writers, travel bloggers could qualify for those sort of rates. The next area is, in fact, if you're retired. So if you're a senior, particularly if you're over 55 years old, there are lots and lots of opportunities to get discounted fares. So you could still be working over 55, but you count as sort of as a senior. Some cruise lines go really far and a long way to try and deal and attract more and more seniors. So for example, Carnival have a very specific section on their site which offers sailings and fares just for seniors, and you'll find discounted cruises for people over the age of 55. You'll also find MSC Cruises. They do a lot of stuff to attract seniors, and they have a whole seniors package where on selected sailings you get discounts, but you'll also get benefits like champagne and chocolate covered strawberries in your cabin, and you'll get invited to a special cocktail party. But you'll find pretty much all cruise lines offer something. The way they often do that is through the booking process. Again, for example, on Royal Caribbean, as you go through the booking process and you put in your age, you may find that you qualify for a discount. Norwegian Cruise Line is another great example where they do have very specific 55 plus sailings where they offer extra discounts and perks. Also very importantly, if you are over 55, look at some of the organizations that exist where you can be members for over 55 years old or sometimes over 60 years old, because many of those then have relationships with different providers. So for example, in the US, there's AARP, which is aimed at seniors, and they have a whole travel site, which is a partnership with Expedia where you can book not only hotels, flights, but also importantly, cruises at a discount. There's a huge range of jobs and professions and industries where you can get discounts. So how do you actually tap into those discounts? Well, there's a couple of ways. First of all, the most sensible thing to do is ask the cruise line. And one of the easiest ways of doing that, of course, is look on their website or just using a search engine and type in discount for firemen, discount for seniors, whatever you're looking for, or whatever your job is, and see if anything comes up. Secondly, of course, if you work with an agent, simply ask the agent, are there discounts for my particular profession? The third thing, and I've touched on it a couple of times, is join a site which is targeting your particular industry or your particular job. And you'll find there are many of those. So if there's any sort of trade organization or collective, look at those and see if they offer discounts on cruises. And the fourth way you can access them is use some aggregator sites like Vacations to Go or similar sites in your country, because you'll often find they will have themed areas. So just as many of them will have solo traveling, they might have seniors traveling, they might have healthcare professional, teachers, whatever. So take a look at those. There are loads of ways you can get cheaper fares by doing a little bit of research and finding out if you're going to get a benefit. Ask the cruise lines, ask your agent, and certainly use the internet and search. I hope you found that helpful. I have loads more videos full of tips and advice to help you with cruising. So why don't you watch another one of those right now?